That's what we're doing today, everybody. That's what we're doing. Welcome back to Just Blazor Programming. Today we'll be discussing how to create animations in a Blazor project. Now, with Blazor rendering, there are a little bit of some rules and stuff you have to follow. But in this case, I think I found probably one of the best and simplest examples for you in order to have animations for a business-oriented web application. Now, the reason why I use those words specifically is because animations can come into two different kinds. So those two kinds are the ones like we're dealing with today, which are just HTML and CSS based with some JavaScript perhaps. I'll get into that a little bit later when we get into the project. And the other kind are sprite-based animations. Now, sprite-based animations are more for games and such. And yes, you can create games and web applications. The problem is that there is a different there's a different methodology and intention when it comes to it, and a different way to apply it in an application. Now, if there's more demand for this kind of video, I might make that one, but that is not what we're dealing with today. We're not dealing with anything sprite-based. We are just dealing with how to render animations in Blazor for a business-oriented web application. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, in case you didn't see it in the beginning, that is what we're going to do today. We're not just limited to having these kinds of animations. In fact, we're going to be using a library that handles all the animations for us. However, before I get into the actual code stuff, I need to go into some explanations of what's happening here. So in this case, if you ever find yourself wanting to use any sort of animation or any library whatsoever that requires some sort of JavaScript interactions, you will be required to have something called a JavaScript interop within your project. So what does that mean is that Blazor cannot really understand what's happening if you just use regular JavaScript in your program somewhere. If the JavaScript tries to interact with Blazor in any way, it doesn't know what's happening, and that could affect the rendering certain things, and things might not actually render as you want them to. Which is why you are required, whenever you have some sort of JavaScript script to invoke within the Blazor, you have to have it through a JS Interop. It says here in the Microsoft Docs that only mutate this only mutates the document object model with JavaScript when the object doesn't interact with Blazor. Blazor maintains the DOM, but blah blah blah. What it says, and then it says the DOM may no longer match Blazor's internal representation. Remember, Blazor is doing a virtual representation of what's happening with the DOM. That's why it's much faster than just directly dealing with the DOM itself. That is how I believe Angular and React work in a similar way, where they have some sort of like a virtual interpretation of what's happening. So in this case, that is why you need JS Interop, which is kind of funny because I found a library that does not require you to have a JS Interop to make the animations work. So I just bring this up as an aside, essentially, for you guys who are using other libraries for whatever purpose. That's the reason why you need to use the JS Interop. But in this case, we don't really need it, which is pretty good. In fact, I got to give a shout out to Blazor.Animate here. This is where I got the methods for. Like, you're going to see, if you look at his code and you look at mine, they'll be very similar, but I've just condensed it down to something much more simpler than what he has. What he has is a very complicated, complex, but optimized version of what I'm about to show you. Mine is just a few, not that much code, honestly. And then you can iterate as much as you want. So I have to give credit where credit is due. And if you want to get like a package that he built, you can get it from Blazorize, which is another thing that I made, another video that I made. You can watch over there. But just know that you have to pay for it. There's a license for it, but it's fine because in this case, we're looking at code with MIT license within it. So another thing, the CSS library that we're going to be importing is called Animate on Scroll. So don't worry, you don't have to have the scroll in order to make the animations work. The reason why this particular one was chosen is because there is not much JavaScript interactions that you need to do. Therefore, you don't have to go through the JS Interop stuff if you don't want to. You can go through it if you feel like it, but I don't believe you need to. The only thing that you really care about is having the init be invoked, which does not require the JS Interop because it's like a global thing, basically. What it does require is either you to install it within your project or to have it as a CDN, which that's what I did with my project, which I'll show you once we get to it. And then finally, the reason why I do recommend this particular CSS project is because of the fact that it is MIT licensed. and also of the other, not having too much JavaScript to write. So therefore, it saves you time writing any JS interop. And the only reason why I even bring it up in the first place is just to remind you that when it comes to packages, it is important to have that if you are using anything with JavaScript. We're just lucky in this case that it doesn't require it as much, at least. So let's get into the actual code right now. So just so that we can save some time, I'm just going to build out a Blazor server app. As you can see, you've probably seen me do this all the time. So we're just going to put next. You probably can't see me go down over here. Go next. .NET 7 is fine. Doesn't really matter. So as with all packages, the first thing I'm going to start doing is adding the CDN into it, so that we can just, have everything we need once this runs. So you could download it through npm if you want to, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to have the CDN. I think that is much easier for this case. And if you feel like downloading the npm stuff, then you can. It's not going to change anything. Let's get to host. Where's the host? Where is it? All right, here it is. So the CDNs were found in the AOS website, but I have them here. So I'm just going to copy paste them. This one here. And this one here. And don't forget that we will need a JavaScript file to actually run that one line of code that it has there. So that's what you're going to need to do as well. So this is actually ripped straight from that Blazorize package, this one line of code. So don't feel too bad because it is MIT licensed. Also, it is like a very, it is a very, we call it very common piece of code too. So we're just going to build a new folder for JavaScript. I always like, it's always good to organize. And then we're going to create our JavaScript file in here. There we go. And let's call this JavaScript file animation. Beautiful. So there's nothing written here, but we are going to add some code in here. This code is straight from that over there, from the Blazorize, it's straight from the Blazorize source, but that's all you're going to need. Window.addEventListener load function AOS init. So that's all we're gonna. All this does is initialize the AOS package essentially. So right now, and don't forget, because we added this new JavaScript in there, we also have to add it into our host file as well. So JS animations, you have to get whatever the path is. So in this case, this particular path looks like this: /js/animation. No s .js, and doing that should allow you to load the AOS animations without any issues. You don't really require a JS interop on this case because it's on window load, and I don't think that's going to cause any rendering issues. I don't see any JS interops being needed, and that's the only thing you need in this particular CSS package. This can change if you are using other packages though. But the good news is that we don't have to worry about that right now. So how does an animation look like? How do we get to create this animation? Well, in order to make an animation work in the Blazor environment, at least using this particular package, we will have to create a component. That's probably the easiest way. A component that takes in properties to allow you to change animation whatever kind of animation you want to use, and whatever properties for that animation you want it to have, that include like delay or whatever. It does like delay of it, opacity, like it depends on how you're going to build it. But I'm going to make a very, very simple version so that you could just have it. And then if you want to make it more complicated, you can. And then I'll show you like a slightly, maybe a little bit more optimized version of it. But it's not going to be compared to anything in that other package. It's just going to be straight up, easy peasy, lemon squeezy stuff. So for what we need here, we need to create a new component in this case. We're going to add a new component, and we're going to call this our animation component. And we don't need a page URI in this case. We don't want this to be available to us through a nav bar. That's not what this is for. This is just to add animations to our existing components, because we're gonna use in case you don't know what I'm going to start discussing, these are things that have to do with Blazor's, how Blazor handles components and child components and stuff like that. So in this case, we're basically making a component that is a parent component, and then there's a child component in there that is a render fragment. And that render fragment will basically act like it normally does. The only difference is that on top of it, there's a component that just handles animation. So you're basically, in easy peasy terms, you're just wrapping your component, whatever component it is, within an animation component itself, and that will make it look like, do whatever it wants. So you don't have to worry too much about what you're actually putting in there. You just have to care about the properties. You'll see what I mean. It's really simple. In this case, you want to add these using statements here, system.globalization and the options. And now we don't really need this anymore. We will create a div that will take in our AOS data AOS properties. So I've already written them down, so I'm just going to copy paste them and just explain and give you like a second to look at it. Just make sure that you can actually see it. There we go. I think that's a little better. Let me know if you can't see it. All right, perfect. So what's happening here is that I'm going to create some variables that are string variables to correspond to what's happening in the data AOS. I don't have it anymore. What's happening in the data AOS library. So the library requires a few components and properties that are already built in that you have to call. So for example, if you want an animation, you have to say, I want the fade in animation. Therefore, this animation name is going to be fade in. This wouldn't be a very good component if we have to hard code everything, but that's exactly what we're going to do now. And then I'm going to show you how to, do it the more correct way. This is just to show you that it's going to work essentially. So, and it will also prepare us for the next step out of it. So because I already have my named components here, I want to create some variables for this. Here. So now we have our variables. We also have to create a variable to correspond to this child component, which is going to be passed into the animation component. So that will be a parameter. In this case, you will be required to have the parameter data annotation on top of it, because we're going to be passing it in. So now we could actually wrap anything we want in here, or any other component can go inside of here. That's what I'm saying. So you have this div thing, you have whatever is being rendered in there, and then you have your animation play out, which is pretty cool, without using any without using any a JavaScript. So for now, we will just leave like that, and then we need our onParameterSet. So this is a lifecycle function that works when you have parameters being sent into this object. So that's for later. You didn't see that. Don't worry about that. I'll get into that later. That's just a piece of code that we're gonna do in order to make this a little bit more efficient. But because right now all we're doing is hard coding it to a fade left, to the fade left animation, giving a duration of 4,000 milliseconds and delay of 50, and then you'll see what I mean. So the reason why we need to use onParameterSet and not invoke is because onParameterSet works when the parameters are being passed in. So anytime you have a parameter that you want to pass into a component, you put them inside the onParameterSet in order to do the assignments. Where the invoke happens, I think, after all that is done. So you want to do it during it. If not, then you're gonna have this be set up in the wrong way. That's why you can't set this up up here. If you're having components being brought, if you're having the parameters being brought in, you have to do it within this particular lifecycle component. So now that we have that done, what is there left to do other than to test it? Oh, well, we have to add it to something, right, in order for us to actually test it. So let's go into our counter, and well, add it, I guess. Animation. So what we're missing here is a parameter for the child content, which all it is just whatever's going to be inside of here. So let's just actually move the button in here. So it's going to be very similar to what I put in the original, what you saw originally. So I believe that's all you got to do. I'm going to run that. So now our counter component has an animation that's wrapping around the actual button itself. Go here, and there it is. It's supposed to go to the left. It's fade left. I believe this is the one that I called it. So just to show you that isn't a fluke, we're gonna change the name to fade up. I think that is one of them. Now there's one for the east direction, basically. So yeah, so now it fades up. Oh, goes right up there. So even though this doesn't look that impressive, I like it because it's very simple and you have all the basic like animations that you'll probably need. If you want to do anything really specific, and that requires CSS and HTML and that kind of stuff, and that's not what I do. This is just a very Blazor specific course. So if you need an HTML and CSS to learn how to do animations, that is a different person altogether. If you're a UI guy and a web app guy all in one, then you're a unicorn, and you know, good for you. But I ain't no unicorn. I'm just a guy. But now it's the time that we're gonna, you know, make this a little bit better. How we're gonna make it better? Well, we're gonna make sure that we are actually able to pass in the specific animation we want. So you could make this work for any of the properties here, but we're just going to be doing this for one specific property, which is the animation one. So in this case, we need to have a list of this animation. So if I go to the AOS GitHub, that's where you'll find all the names and stuff for their functions, for however to the names for all the animations and stuff. You'll find it on their GitHub. That'll be in the description. So as you can see here, fade, fade up, fade down, left, right, blah, 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 and then there's more. So for right now, let's say we just want these over here, just these 5, right? It's kind of annoying having to hard code this all the time and building, you know, like the worst thing to do is to build entire like different components just to have one, you know, just to have a single animation there, unless there's a very specific one that you've like really made, that you custom made it because you wanted a specific thing, that's different. But if you're trying to reuse the same component because you just want to use the different animations already provided, then, you know, there's no point in building all of that. It's much better to have a way of getting those animation, you know, some sort of list or something. So normally, if we were working with numbers, which we're not, you could get away with using an enum. But in this case, because we're working with string, hard-coded, you know, const, we need something else. So instead, we're gonna be using a static class that has static strings in there, so that we could not static string, I'm sorry, that has const in there that are ready to go and that we could provide to whatever component we need in order for us to, you know, not have to hard code it all the time, and we just have the list in front of us in case we ever need it. And it makes, you know, using these animations and keeping track of them way easier. So you'll see what I'm talking about. In this case, we'll be building this particular class within the data directory. That's where these other classes are that also deal with data go into. So, you know, it makes sense to me. But we're just gonna make a new class. Call it animation name. So in this case, we need to make this class static. So we don't really need to invoke this or anything. We just need to call it, and then we'll have access to the constant there, which I'm just gonna copy paste, and voila. You just need to write this. Now you can do this for all of them if you want to. I'm not gonna do it for all of them. I think you get the picture as to what I am trying to do here, and you'll see what I mean. We're gonna go back to the counter, and we're also gonna go the first thing before we go back to the counter and do the change we have to do there, we have to do changes to the animation component first. That includes this. So this needs to know exactly what it's trying to get in this case. And in this case, we have another, this is going to be basically another parameter that it's expecting. Also, in case you're confused as to why I'm not writing this like up here somewhere, it's because you don't need to write up there. The parameters here are not the same as the parameters in your HTML. I am just assigning them through variables. In case you get confused as to why it looks like this, and I'm not going to put it anywhere in the HTML, it's because we're going to do something else with it. We need to assign this to the parameter set, and you'll see what I mean. So in this case, I'll actually type it to you, because we're going to test first whether or not this string is null or empty. We call the animation name select. And then we're just going to take that. We're going to cut that out. We don't need that in there anymore. And then we're just going to assign it to the animation name. So you will have access to this property once we go into the component. In case you don't know much about how the parameters work within the components and then how to pass them through a child component, you're going to have access to this parameter within the component that we called animation. And you'll be able to assign this if you want to. And I just have it here, you know, in case there's a null or whatever. Then it won't get an animation, and then if not, then we will. So now you have a way through using the animation select class that we created and this in order to keep swapping the animations you want without changing up the component. And the way you add access to the animation name class that has our basic list in there, basically a list in there, even though it's not really a list, is through, you know, the using. Let me get the add this right up here. So we need access to the data directory, and that's not what that's called. As you can see, I do test my things out before. Give it whatever name you call the project .data. So now we have access to the directory, and we will also have access to the animation select. So in this case, animation name select equal to, and then we're gonna make some variables to put in here. So let's make this variable. And on the uninitialize, we will be the ones to set up whatever it is going to be. In this case, you're setting, so the difference between doing it in the animation component, even though it looks very similar to what we're doing here, is the fact that now, regardless of which component you go into, you can choose a different animation. So in this case, you see I have access to, actually see that. Yeah. So you see I have fade down, fade left, fade right, fade. It's because I have access to all of the constants I just created inside that class. So now I don't have to worry about remembering, you know, to hard code it or anything. I just set it up using this and give it to any component I want. And now I have the whole list in front of me and just say, you know, fade down instead. And just make sure to assign it here. And then you're good. So all I have to do is add that to make sure to pass that in up here. And you are good to go at that point. Add that. So now we are passing in whatever we chose. In this case, I'm choosing fade down. Just save. In this case, we have a fade down being put into the animation select variable. That's going to be passed into our animation component through the animation select property, which will come over here fill up the string through this parameter, and then it will assign it on parameter. Select lifecycle component and add it to the animation name, and then that will change it to whatever you want. And you can do this to any one of the types here. You can go out of your way and make a different class for each one of them if you feel like it, or you could just add, you know, if you just be like lazy, you can add them all into one big class, and just remember that some of them are the delays and some of them are whatever. So they all have to be strings, which makes the process a lot easier. It's too bad we couldn't use enums in this case, but what can you do? Maybe you can, but I believe that using this class is probably the better way. So let's test it out. So now we are putting fade down instead of whatever it is that we chose before. So there's no more hard coding. Let's do that real quick. So the big thing is here that now we can actually change the animations through the component we have wrapped it around instead of the actual animation component itself. Fade down. Look, went down. And then you'll just do it one more time. I'll just do a fade. You know? So this. There. So now you have a way of creating animations without much work, without too much craziness. It's all done for you on an MIT licensed library, and a way to make sure that your whatever component you're going to be using, whatever it's going to be called, you can pass in the animation names that you need to, and any other property you wish, fairly easy, without going through the process of super like hard coding it with like a string hard code or something like that. So this will be a slightly more optimized way of doing what we did in the beginning, and that's all there is to animations here. If you do require something more complex, or if you require another CSS package that does have JavaScript, then yes, you will have to go through the process of adding the JS interrupts in there and then having Blazor basically, you know, use them. But in this case, luckily in this package, it's pretty good. The fact that you don't have to go through that process, it's mostly that one-liner here that you have to make sure you have. And if you want to see a way better version of this, you can just go to the Blazor.Animate GitHub. I'll put all of the GitHubs here if you want. And then I'll probably add this to mine. Now we're going to have one project in my GitHub when this is up. So, you know, pretty good, pretty good. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this animation tutorial. If you want to see the sprite animation stuff, let me know. If you want to see something else specifically, also let me know. Anyways, just Blazor out.